I'm joined now by Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Be with you.
So I want to throw to a clip right now of something that Donald Trump said just this morning.
You campaigned on lowering the price of groceries. How will you justify cutting food assistance in this bill?
Let me just tell you, the cut is going to give everybody much more food because prices are coming way down. Groceries are down.
You guarantee that your voters who supported you in the election, particularly working class voters, will not lose health insurance under this bill?
Oh, they won't lose health insurance.
So that was Donald Trump being asked about the budget bill that he's pushing through with his own party. And he's asked about the prospect of healthcare being cut and food stamps being cut. And in both instances, he says that not only will they not be cut, but it'll be even more plentiful after the bill. Can I have your reaction to that?
The GOP tax scam, which is this one big, ugly bill that Donald Trump is trying to jam down the throats of the American people, hurts everyday Americans and helps billionaires. There are three key components to the bill. First, the bill will take away health care from approximately 14 million Americans, working class Americans, all across the country, children, seniors, and people with disabilities. And it will actually increase copays, premiums, and deductibles for millions more. That's the first toxic thing that this GOP tax scam Republican budget bill will do. Second, it enacts the largest cut to nutritional assistance programs in American history. More than $300 billion in cuts. Literally, they're taking food out of the mouths of children, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. That's the second toxic thing. And the third toxic component to this bill is that all of this is being done to provide massive tax breaks to their billionaire donors like Elon Musk. And at the same time, they're going to saddle our children and grandchildren with trillions of dollars in additional debt. Donald Trump, no surprise, is lying to the American people again. They're going to take health care away from you, take nutritional assistance away from you, and they're doing it to benefit their billionaire donors.
Well, look, it's almost no surprise that Donald Trump is going to lie. He lies every chance he gets. But what do you say to your Republican colleagues who know better and yet are still going to vote for this bill, thinking that they have some cover by virtue of the fact that Donald Trump is out there spewing lies about the fact that this is going to give you more food assistance, that this is going to give you better health care, when in fact it cuts both of those things? What do you say to your Republican colleagues, and what do you say to their constituents who are listening to their elected officials lie to them?
Reality is that hospitals are going to close, nursing homes are going to shut down. People are actually going to die if these Medicaid cuts and their efforts to try to detonate parts of the Affordable Care Act are successfully enacted into law. And so they can lie all they want. They won't be able to run away from those cold, hard, callous facts that are going to hurt the people that they are here in Washington to represent. That's why we've seen such an extraordinary reaction all across the country. House Democrats are continuing to lean in to holding town hall meetings with our constituents. Republicans are running away from town hall meetings because they can't defend the GOP tax scam. They can't defend this toxic budget. They cannot defend this one big, ugly bill.
This isn't the only issue that Republicans are running away from. There was just a situation where Trump was gifted a $400 million jet, and now you've got Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate pretending that this is somehow acceptable, that it would, echoing Donald Trump's line, parroting his line, that we would be stupid not to take it. What do you think would happen, A, if the situation was reversed and we had an analogous situation with a President Obama or President Biden? And B, what do you say to these Republican members of Congress who suddenly have decided that whatever Trump says is more important than the plain text of the Constitution?
These Republicans are rank hypocrites. If President Barack Obama even suggested the possibility of accepting from a foreign power, who, by the way, is close to Hamas and Iran, accepted a $400 million flying palace as a gift, they wouldn't be trying to simply send Barack Obama to jail. They try to bury him underneath the jail. Remember, this is the same group of people, these extreme MAGA Republicans, who suggested almost that there was a constitutional crisis because Barack Obama had the temerity to one day wear a tan suit in the middle of a hot Washington summer. Listen, here's the reality with this group of people. Facts don't matter. Hypocrisy is not a constraint to their behavior. They will say one thing and do the other. And these people actually believe, they've been taught this by Donald Trump, that shamelessness is their superpower.
Right.
They just think that they can be as shameless as possible. But here's the thing. The American people aren't going for it. The American people are paying attention. Donald Trump, after his first 100 days, was the most unpopular president in American history. So while folks may not be able to follow the daily outrage, the American people do understand one thing. Donald Trump promised, Brian, to lower the high cost of living. In fact, he said he was going to lower costs on day one. Costs aren't going down, they're going up. The Republicans, and with these reckless Trump tariffs, are actually crashing the economy in real time, and they're driving us toward a recession. The American people know it. They don't like it.
Right. But hey, as long as Donald Trump gets his $400 million jet, then we're all square. I want to turn your attention to a moment that we saw from Kristi Noem this morning, where she was asked to define habeas corpus.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right
let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people.
So clearly a misguided response there from Kristi Noem, and we've seen the same thing from Stephen Miller. All of these Trump administration officials are trying to imbue Donald Trump with this power that A, he doesn't have, and B, that's actually a check on his own power, because it's a power that's afforded to the legislative branch to serve as a check against, again, on a member of the executive branch. And so can I have your reaction to the fact that we are now seeing a president, an executive branch, try to usurp all of this authority that doesn't exist, but in fact belongs to your branch of government, the legislative branch?
Every time these extremists come before Congress to testify, they put their ignorance on full display. Nobody does it better than the so-called Homeland Security Secretary. They don't understand the Constitution, don't respect it, and they don't respect the fact that the framers decided that we were going to create a system of checks and balances, separate and co-equal branches of government, so that the people's representatives, particularly in the House of Representatives, can push back aggressively against an out-of-control executive branch. But Donald Trump is continuing to try and behave like a king because he doesn't have the capacity to govern like a president. That's the reality of the situation. That's why we've seen government by executive order. And we've also seen the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, consistently push back against executive overreach. I think more than 225 cases have been brought challenging the unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders issued by Donald Trump. And more than 100 different court decisions have been issued, freezing those actions in place, issuing permanent injunctions, preliminary injunctions, or restraining orders. And listen, I mean, I think the framers created a circumstance where they wanted to make sure through the Constitution that the people could stand up. Habeas corpus is an example of it. The emoluments clause in the Constitution is an example of it. An emolument basically is a fancy constitutional word for a potentially corrupt gift. And the reason why the framers said that emoluments were problematic is because they didn't want foreign powers or outside monarchs and kings to try to influence policy decisions that were being made by the President of the United States of America. And so, in fact, in the case of the emoluments clause, congressional approval is required. And so Donald Trump really doesn't even have the ability to accept this $400 million flying palace without coming before Congress. I can tell you every single Democrat will reject his capacity to receive such a corrupt gift. And we're going to fight, of course, to maintain the powers of habeas corpus, the powers of the independent judiciary to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. And we need our Republican colleagues to stand up for the Congress's authority to actually determine how your taxpayer dollars are being spent. That's not a presidential power, it's a congressional power.
Okay, so you've laid out a few examples of these congressional powers, whether Congress has the ability to allocate funds where it sees fit, which is again the prerogative of the legislative branch, the power to suspend or eliminate habeas corpus, which again belongs to the legislative branch, the power to block a president from accepting a foreign emolument, again that belongs to the legislative branch, and yet we're seeing these instances happen. And so how do you reconcile these two things, where you have something that is unconstitutional or illegal, but the Constitution isn't self-executing, and so what is being done right now from the House Democrat side to actually enforce what the Constitution actually says? Because again, we know that these things are unconstitutional. We know that they're illegal. Donald Trump doesn't care about the Constitution. He is not moved by what is constitutional or not. And so there's that delta here where it's happening, but it can't happen. And so how do you square those two things?
Any of these issues, first of all, we only need 4 Republicans to join us in connection with unified Democratic opposition to the outrageous things that are occurring, and we can stop it from happening. The problem that we face up until this point with the narrow majority that House Republicans currently have, it's the narrowest majority of any Congress since 1931, despite all of their claims that they have some massive mandate from the public. We only need 4 House Republicans to join us on any of these issues. And so we're continuing to keep the pressure on them, hold them accountable in the communities that they represent. When they don't hold town hall meetings, we've been holding town hall meetings in Republican districts to make sure that we are communicating with our colleagues through the people that they are supposed to represent, so that they cannot come to Washington and pretend like they are doing something else when they are actively undermining the interests of the people that they serve, as opposed to standing up for the people that they are supposed to represent. The other thing that we're going to need to do sooner rather than later, once we get through this budget reconciliation process, and we're working as hard as we can to protect the health care of the American people, the nutritional assistance of the American people, protect veterans who are under assault, protect, public education, of course, that's under assault, as well as housing assistance that is also under assault in this one big ugly bill that Donald Trump is trying to jam down the throats of the American people, the GOP tax scam. As we approach the appropriations process, which will begin in earnest later on this summer, as we approach the end of the current fiscal year, which ends on September 30th, we're going to have to challenge our Republican colleagues to step up and defend Congress's authority to allocate taxpayer dollars. Right. And I believe that we're in lockstep with our Senate Democratic colleagues on this issue. And that's a confrontation that needs to be had in the context of the appropriations process, so that the House and the Senate, as separate and co-equal branches of government, can reassert ourselves on behalf of the American people. And we're going to work as hard as we can to convince the 4 Republicans to join us.
Your Republican colleagues, they're politicians first and foremost. They understand how that works. They are barreling ahead right now with an effort to strip at least $880 billion, although, if they can't get some of these hardline Republicans to sign on to this effort because it explodes the deficit too much, they're going to have to make even deeper cuts, because God forbid they go after tax cuts for the wealthy. And so if we see even deeper cuts than the already prescribed $880 billion of cuts to Medicaid, they understand what taking away healthcare does, because Presumably, a lot of these people were around back in 2017 when they tried to attack the ACA, and that led to the biggest ouster of Republicans in the House in modern American history. We had Democrats won the House by the biggest margin in modern U.S. history, flipping 41 seats to Democratic control. They understand how this is existential for them. And so have you heard from any of your Republican colleagues about the massive blinking red light that they are ushering in right now by virtue of doing this?
They certainly are increasingly of the view that this is a legislative train wreck that is going to turn into a political train wreck. Now, they haven't had the courage to say that out loud, but the reality is they are nervous and concerned. It's one of the reasons why they actually are going to have a Rules Committee hearing to advance the GOP tax scam at 1 a.m. in the morning. This is unprecedented.
Famously doing it at 1 a.m. so that the most people can watch.
That's absolutely correct. So we're going to lean in aggressively. Perhaps they were of the view that Democrats are not going to show up. We're going to be there in force. In fact, we'll be there in greater numbers than perhaps would otherwise have been the case. Make it clear that we're going to forcefully push back on behalf of the American people. I think the votes aren't completely there yet. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump came to Capitol Hill.
Right.
Because he knows that there are challenges, including amongst some so-called swing seat Republicans who, go home and they pretend to be moderate, go on TV and pretend to be moderate, but try to hide their votes in Washington, D.C., where they vote with the extreme MAGA Republicans. But this time, they know that the people are watching, particularly as it relates to how they might vote on health care, on Medicaid, on nutritional assistance to children, veterans, and seniors.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of everything that's happening with this budget bill. Leader Jeffries, I appreciate your time. Thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.